Hello everyone, this is a response to I-53 Network's $1,000 challenge. They're offering $1,000 to anyone who can justify induction, and in their words, therefore, justifying atheistic science. I'm just going to respond to the points made in the video and explain why this challenge is not really a challenge. Okay, the first point is they said science is based on inductive inference. Okay. Science is based on the scientific method, which is both a superset and very much apart from induction. Science can use classical induction as an investigative tool, much like writers use psychotropic drugs to help them write. The ultimate arguments of science are not grounded upon classical induction. All modern applied science is based on falsifiability and statistical inference. Theoretical physics is special in that it's based on plausibility and the principle of invoking a single tooth fairy. Theoretical physics becomes plain physics when each tooth fairy becomes established. However, theoretical physics is understood to represent educated scientific opinion and not scientific fact. Okay, so falsifiability is the backbone of science. Any claim in science which proposes a model of reality must be subject to falsification. That is to say, there must be data which could be presented that would render the claim incorrect. The claim is thus made available to anyone who might want to independently test the claim. The uniformity of nature is required by falsifiability to allow for independent testing of the claim because the claim must make continuous predictions. So whatever, the uniformity of nature becomes a part of the claim implicitly. So statistical methods are then used to give confidence in the claim relative to a data collection to establish its credibility. The statistics are used to compare the likelihood of the claimed hypothesis versus any other competing hypothesis, which is usually called a null hypothesis. Science can thus weed out competing theories in an attempt to arrive at the one which is the most reliable model of reality. With continued data collection, theorems from statistics such as the law of large numbers or the central limit theorem provide analytic justification for improved confidence over time, so long as the data continues to fit the model. These theorems are powerful in the sense that with increasing samples they imply convergence towards certainty. Right? It isn't just increased confidence, it's a convergence towards pretty ridiculously high probabilities. Science does not assert pure truth as if deduced from axioms. Axiomatic logic has no known definitive mapping to reality without subjective assumptions. Instead, science presents posits or claims that have passed through the filter of the scientific method. While the scientific method cannot guarantee truth, it can often guarantee things that are definitely false. So the Earth is flat, larger objects fall faster than smaller objects, the sun rotates around the Earth, and so on, have all been debunked by the process of science. So the scientific method can only lead to false or inaccurate statements for as long as there are no credible counterexamples. What remains of standard science at any given time are either things which happen to be true or things which seem to be true but for which we have no current method of determining are not true. As long as knowledge is accumulative, science cannot go backwards, but only forwards in a direction that converges towards the truth of reality, and those things that are essentially near truth, but we're unable to falsify. This allows us to form usable and testable predictions that can be relied upon. An example of a near truth would be Newton's laws of mechanics, which require an adjustment to compensate for the warping of space-time. It was not known before Einstein and represented an extremely good approximation of reality that is so good it's even still used today, even though we know it's not perfect. So the second point that was made that I'm going to address here is science borrows intellectual capital from Christianity. Science does not borrow any intellectual capital from Christianity because Christianity is neither the source for induction nor does it have anything relevant to add to the principle of induction. Science was practiced by people like Archimedes of Syracuse, who lived from 287 BC to 212 BC, and therefore did not rely on Christianity for any intellectual capital. Archimedes, for example, had no reason to believe that his water displacement theory would work on King Heron's laurel wreath unless he could use some kind of induction principle himself. So that predates Christianity. The treatise on introduction given at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy does not cite any theistic or Christian justification for induction either. The subject is clearly rich with historical and philosophical analysis. However, theistic contributions to induction are nowhere to be found. The idea that Christianity is somehow the source or basis of induction appears to be an attempt to take credit for something they associate with themselves, but they have neither created nor made any significant contributions to. This is much like their case for morality. The third thing they state, third point I'm going to address here, is non-theistic science requires justification for induction, otherwise must accept theism. Okay. This is a false dichotomy, since theism doesn't justify induction and science doesn't require justification for classical induction. In particular, the idea of the uniformity of nature, in particular, the idea that the uniformity of nature comes from a deity is a completely artificial idea. 4. Atheists should be excommunicated from science. Science is not a church, it's a practice. 5. To be a scientist, you must be a theologian. Okay. A theologian need not be a theist. A theologian is someone who studies theology. For example, it is possible to be an atheist theologian. In any event, it is neither necessary nor in any way beneficial for a scientist to be either a theist or a theologian, since nothing in the practice of science requires any skill or content that comes from either. 6. You offer $1,000 for the justification of induction. Okay. In order to win the $1,000, we are told we must find a justification for induction, then convince the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to accept this justification and update their webpage with this new information accordingly. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is cited as a disinterested third party. Okay, this is patently ridiculous. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I'll just initial SEP, is merely an online academic encyclopedic compilation. They are not a journal for leading-edge philosophical discussion. In order to change their encyclopedia, a paper would have to be submitted to philosophical journals and be generally accepted as new and important insight into the philosophy of induction. This kind of an effort would cost well in excess of $1,000. I contacted the SEP and they wrote to me as follows. They write, "Though we are aware of this challenge, we don't endorse it in any way. They did not contact us in advance to enlist our cooperation. We wouldn't really have cooperated in any case, since such proposals are not consistent with our academic mission." Signed, Edward N. Zalta, principal editor of the SEP. So, I-53 Network named SEP judge and arbiter for their challenge, even though they were not made aware of this fact when the challenge was created. In short, this challenge has nothing to do with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or as far as I can tell, Stanford at all. So I don't see that this actual challenge is at all serious. 7. I'm just going to talk about the Stanford Encyclopedia and what its contents are. The page cited, which I'll give the links over here. I mean, the I-53 network has a link to it too, but I'll just repeat the link. I mean, if you want to know about the problem of induction, it's fine. It's fairly lengthy. It has a lot of math in it, actually. But you can just skip those sections. It doesn't really matter. So it has like it talks about the unjustifiability problem posed by Hume in 1888. But then it also goes on to describe falsifiability as described by Popper, 1959. And then there's some various discussions on probabilities and how that changes the weight of induction. And interestingly enough, the page also contains a debunking of creationism and intelligent design. So they have a quote that basically says, Christian creationism depends not at all upon any recognized inductive argument. And then for intelligent design, they say the intelligent design argument depends on a probabilistic fallacy. Okay, so I'm going to make one final point here. It is precisely science and philosophy's self-accountability that leads them to examine induction to this degree of scrutiny. The alternative of a theistic justification is not satisfying because it itself is not justified and totally unaccountable to any logic. This is simply a reformulation of God of the gaps into a particular gap that cannot be closed by deductive methods. However, this shoving of God into this gap omits a very important point, and that is that induction can actually be wrong. So I'm going to give some examples here. Pierre de la Fermat was looking at the formula 2 to the 2 to the n plus 1, and that's this function this function right here. Okay? So we're raising 2 to the power of n and raising 2 to the power of that, then we're adding 1. So Pierre de la Fermat tried this for various values of n, which he could work out on a piece of paper. So if you put n equals 0, you get 2 to the 2 to the 0 plus 1, which is equal to 3. And that's a prime number. If we put in 1, we'll see 2 to the 2 to the 1 plus 1, and that's 5, also a prime number. If we now do 2 to the 2 to the 2 plus 1, that's 17, again a prime number. 2 to the 2 to the 3 plus 1 is 257, which is a prime number. And 2 to the 2 to the 4 plus 1 is 65,537, which is a prime number. So if you were to use classical induction, we might say that, oh well, maybe this formula will always give us a prime number. Right, those are all the numbers that you can work out on a piece of paper fairly quickly. Well, it turns out that 2 to the 2 to the 5 plus 1 is equal to 4,294,967,297, which is equal to 641 times 6,700,417. So that's a composite number. Okay. Another example is just, the classification of animals. So let's say we were to pose a theory, maybe this theory used to exist, is that all mammals give live birth. So we can list a really long list of examples like pigs, humans, foxes, goats, lions, horses, deers, bears, otters, dolphins, seals, and so on. And they all give live birth, and they're all mammals, so it seems, okay, fine, then I guess all mammals give live birth, right? There would be a use of classical induction. And of course, the duck-billed platypus lays eggs, so it has mammary glands and therefore is a mammal, so oh well. Or you could just go with taxonomy in general. The classification of animals into phylums used to be determined by anatomy and embryology. This has changed to using genetics. The reason is that from an evolutionary point of view, common ancestry is now properly determined by genetics. And so this has led to some changes in animal classifications. So Dawkins, in his book, I believe, The Ancestor's Tale, gives an example of the annelid worms, which are segmented earthworms, leeches, and bristleworms. And it used to be thought that they were unrelated to molluscs, which are like snails. Since anatomy-wise, they really don't look very similar at all. Annelid worms are most are in segments, whereas molluscs or whatever, they just anatomically look very different. However, the genes show that they are actually quite similar. So the two are in fact now in a superphylum called, and I'm going to butcher this, Lophotrochozoa. Anyway, so it's another example of how induction is not that useful once more facts come to light. Anyways, then the final example I'm going to give here is Galileo when he first saw Saturn's rings. He thought that they were not rings at all, but in fact, like, he was the first, Galileo invented the telescope, and he saw Saturn close up first, I guess. And he thought the rings were really just two moons on the side of Saturn, or something like that. The reason why he thought this, of course, is when you look up into the sky, you see nothing but what should be spherical objects. And so he just, by induction, assumed that anything else he sees up there are going to be spherical objects as well. So he thought they were moons. But some 40 years later, Christian Huygens had a better telescope, and he concluded that they were not planets or moons, but in fact rings. So anyway, as new information and data becomes available, we're able to improve our understanding and even discard what was held as science in the past. So it is only by the sheer unaccountability of theistic notions of reality that they are able to endorse induction or the uniformity of nature without any kind of proviso or addenda. So, on the other hand, the scientific method is self-corrective. So such errors can be corrected without violating any scientific principle. Without a self-correcting mechanism of their own, the theists cannot self-correct except by being dragged kicking and screaming by a society that is generally somewhat accepted science. Okay, so finally, if the fork that Kelly Tripleholder from the I-53 network released in his video did not drop to the ground, and this was an established observation, then to a scientist that would represent new data, and in absence of any other explanation, a new model of gravity would have to be considered. However, to a theistically minded person, this might mean nothing, or might be considered a miracle or something of that nature. Without trying to invoke the scientific method, they would invoke an explanation from God and be unaccountable to any logical process. This is why Jesus and his various parlor tricks are considered to be miracles, even though modern-day magicians are capable of superior feats without any similar claims to divine connection. Anyway, so those were my thoughts on the $1,000 channel. Tube you later.